Hey everybody, and welcome back to this little mini series on All the Mods 10. In this video, we're going to be going over some little tips and tricks that I find useful in planning and designing my bases. And then we're going to see some of them in practice in this structure in front of me that I like to call the Star Forge. So let's go. All right, so the first tip I'm going to share with you is that while you are in the exploration phase of this pack, that you drop waystones or use your map to drop waypoints to find biomes or locations that you might want to build your final base in. One thing to keep in mind once you find your perfect location is that it's valuable or worth your while to kind of check underneath the area that you plan to build on, because honestly, it's pretty annoying to find a great location only to find out that underneath your base there's just tons of either water, lava, oil, or other sorts of fluids that you kind of got to take care of if you're going to build underground. Once you have finalized your decision on where to build your base, I would strongly suggest that you hit F9 and find out where your chunk boundaries are, and then go ahead and see if you can build within those boundaries. The reason why you're doing this is because you have a limit of how many chunks that you can force load if you're playing on a server. If you're not and you have full control over this is not a big deal. But I want to make sure that my base can basically fit into some sort of perfect arrangement here. So whether it's 4x4, 4x5, whatever it is, 5x5, I like to make sure that I force load exactly the area that I'm going to use instead of running the risk of kind of building across lines and having to force load a certain chunk literally for like one or two machines. One thing that you should definitely be aware of if you are not already is that chunks are not evenly spaced. And if you're anything like me, everything's got to be even. So in this example here, each one of these black and orange squares represents a 3x3 space. And you can see that there's this little area on the edge here within the chunk boundary that kind of leaves you with an odd spacing. So just bear in mind before you just surround an entire chunk in a wall and say, yep, I'm going to build inside of here and it's all going to be even. Well, no, you might find yourself in a little bit of trouble because the interior of these chunks are definitely not even. And you can see the center point here is slightly off. So just kind of a word of caution here, just be careful when you're mapping out your base. And if you do like to build even like I do, then just be aware of where you're placing those blocks and that the inside of chunks is not basically maybe not be what you think it is. One of the things that I've started doing in my past few playthroughs of Minecraft is I have started hollowing out the entire area underneath where I intend to build. That way I have complete freedom vertically, down towards bedrock to kind of, not need to worry about clearing out a whole bunch of space every time I want to make a new room or area. One of the easiest ways to kind of clear out a hole underneath here is to use a builder from RF Tools. Just put in a clearing quarry in there, set the parameters, and hook it up to some power. You can see this one here is running off of 3 wind generators, and I'm at Y level 255 in the mining dimension. So these are producing, if you watched the last video, mine were only producing like 106 or 109 RF per tick. If they're higher, you get a lot more value out of these things. So with approximately 600 RF per tick, this is the speed that you're going to get. And what I usually do is I set this up and I just start digging my hole well before I plan on even moving over here. So it makes it very easy to kind of build with a lot of freedom as you build down, if that's what you want to do. So the last tip with respect to digging out a hole here is to dig a hole that is much larger than the space that you intend to drop your base in. So let's say the square is where I want to put my base. I'm going to leave a lot of room on either side. I'll actually leave much more than this in a real world scenario, just to give me a lot of freedom, like behind walls, to run cables, pipes, wires. It's just a much better situation. And then kind of what you want to do is just cover this all in with dirt, so essentially it does not look like there's anything underneath. Now this is a screenshot from the initial construction of the Starforge, and you can see that I have followed my own advice and built this thing in a much smaller area than the hole that I dug out. And then here you can just see that I've kind of covered up all the outside edges, and then I'll clean up kind of the textures to make the corners a little bit softer, so you kind of can't tell that I did what I did. I know we kind of just talked about this, but just making sure you take good measurements of all your rooms before you build them to make sure they're exactly odd or exactly even the way you want them could definitely save you from realizing that you made a giant mistake later in the pack when actually 1/4 of your base or 1/2 of your base is not like the other at all. Now, when it comes to building materials, you can obviously use literally whatever you want, regardless of how good or bad it looks. If you're a little bit more anal about, the blocks that you choose, what I like to do is I kind of like to build a palette beforehand. And a couple things to note about this palette is you really need to make sure that the blocks are going to be readily accessible, right? Pretty easy to craft. There's a lot of great blocks with chipped, and there's some other things like with the workbench. I forget what the mod is. Just make sure that what you're building with is sustainable, so that you can actually have enough access to these resources to do a full build. So what you see in front of me here is the literal color palette for the Starforge. So I like to always have sort of a brighter color that stands out a lot more. In this case, I use the red sand, or which is more orange, obviously, but really like this color, really like the texture. Floors, again, whatever you want, just be consistent with it. And one thing to note about floors is that typically, if you have different levels, you are going to have some stairs here and there, unless you use like entirely elevator blocks or portals or something like that. So I like to choose a color for my floors that has a stair block with it that doesn't need to be used with like frame stairs, right? So you can make any block that you find a staircase in that block color if you use the frame stairs. However, this is a real pain, especially when it comes to like the copy and paste gadget. It does not paste in the textured block that you have when you paste it. Now, I think I found that in some mod packs it does actually work. I'm not sure why one works and the other doesn't, but that's just kind of a tip that when you choose your floor color and you plan to have stairs, try to find a color that has the stair like pre-built in it. So I won't dwell on this too much longer, but I just kind of named this the best thing that I could structural machine. Like this kind of wraps machines a little bit. And this is my wall color here. So yeah, this is pretty much the whole color palette, and we'll see that at the end of this video. Just for honorable mention here, and these blocks are a little bit too difficult to probably make a large scale base out of, but just give you some other color palette examples. Here's some nice factory blocks. This is like the only Zycraft brick block that I like. It looks really good. It looks really crisp. This one's not bad either, but the weird red, green, blue, yellow between these things just looks a little strange. Factory blocks has some really cool blocks. So this is kind of that build. And then this is just an example of how basically you can pair grays up with literally any other accent color, whatever it might be. So again, this is all personal preference, but I advise that you have some sort of idea of a color palette and some sort of sustainable, renewable source for the blocks that you are going to choose to build with. In ATM 10, they've replaced the builder's wands with these crafting sticks. This is a netherite stick from supplementaries. Definitely, if you're playing ATM 10, make this block. It's pretty simple. Whoops, that was not the idea. There we go. And put unbreakable on it too. So you're going to take this, and inside here, you're going to make it so that is unbreakable. So that way you can use this indefinitely without it having to lose durability. Most people know what this does, but the building stick will just basically allow you to do this, provided you have the blocks available to do so. So this is kind of how it's very easy just to lay a foundation and then to go vertical either direction. The next bit of advice involves floors. So you want to make sure that your floors and your ceilings are not the same block. Now, you can obviously do that, right? But if you separate, floor 1 and floor 2 with a little bit of airspace in between, then you're going to have a lot more room like this for machines and stuff, underneath or above. And there's also nothing more annoying than texturing your floor a certain way, only to find out that you've actually also textured the ceiling of the room below it. So, if you do this method, you're going to have so much space, you're not going to know what to do with it. And you definitely have plenty of space to leave some room between floors. So this is a screenshot of when I was building the Starforge and designing it. I put the staircase in first and I laid out each one of my floors, and you can see that I have followed my advice again, and I have left a space between each floor to give me a lot of flexibility and maneuverability as far as, machine space between and differing floor textures or ceiling textures if I, chose to do that. If you have an unhealthy obsession with adding staircases into your base, when again they're completely not required for anything, and they're actually a real pain to use, and I almost never actually use them. I just like them for whatever reason. This is something you're going to want to probably do first. I found that if I wait to build my staircase, I have to kind of shoehorn the staircase into the space between floors. So, I learned this lesson a few playthroughs ago. I just build my staircase first, and then all of the floors kind of fall into line after that. So, not only do you want to leave space between floors, it's also wise to leave some space between rooms as well, right? So, you can see this blue area here is actually space that will just get covered up from the outside. You'll never be able to see it, but I'll be able to add doors and access hatches to kind of go into these spaces, and it's a great place to basically hide wiring. So here's a room that is 7 by 7, right? And you can see that I have been able to hide machines in here that are fully automatable, right? So here's some smelting factories. And here's the benefit of leaving the space between floors is that you have all this area here to put things that don't necessarily look that great. So I'm using facades to cover up the AE2 stuff, right? So that's easy. And then I have power to these blocks as well as automation with AE2. And it's all really clean and really buttoned up. And we're going to see a lot of that later. But you can see here that if you don't leave space between here, you run into a problem where the room that you built is actually going to get significantly smaller depending on what you put inside of it. Because now that you don't have the flexibility to kind of build in this area over here, now you have to use space inside of your room, and you might find that things are a little bit more cramped than you initially intended them to be. And we just saw this from below, but this is kind of how I have a lot of my wireless AE points set up here. I just put them, in the center of the hallway and then have dense cabling spread from one end of the other. It's a really clean way to hide access points for this kind of stuff. Getting your base appropriately lit sometimes is a little bit of a task, but I would highly recommend this mod called Simply Light. It comes with a lot of great options, and also you can now color these lights, which you didn't used to be able to do in the past, to kind of fit whatever color scheme or palette that you're going with. I'm not sure if I mentioned this, but this is kind of a mini version of what the Starforge actually looks like, just kind of a shell. This is basically exactly how it started. And one of the things that I always like to do is I like to have a central hub where I can kind of, be the captain and have access to kind of all of the important things that I need. And we'll discuss that in the next episode, I think. But the idea of this little square in the circle here is so that I can have, my 3 terminals, which again, if you're using wireless, you don't really need terminals at all. You can access it throughout your base at any point. But this is kind of just, I want everything in one spot here so that I don't have to go flying between floors to kind of do all of my crafting and get all of my automation set up. So, again, matter of personal preference, but I kind of always have a little what I call like a workshop. And you saw that in the previous episode, and you're going to see a really high-tech version of that soon. Now, if you don't already know, you're about to find out that I absolutely love carpenter blocks. They are so versatile, and they can add a whole new level of depth and texture and all sorts of stuff to your builds. And I would highly recommend using them if you're into a lot of detail. So you can do stuff with these. These are pretty cool blocks. It's kind of a split cube here. And this is how I made some of the designs. Again, we'll see that in a second. So you can cover these up nicely here. And then kind of, just do something like this. And voila. Oops, I messed it up. You get the point though, right? You can do some very, very, very cool stuff with these blocks. So we got a lot of different options with these. Here's what this looks like, on the ground. It's just sitting here. Here's just an example of you being able to use stairs to turn any block that you have into stairs. This is a great lighting solution if you want to do some really slick lighting in your base, but don't want to use any of these mods. This is just a framed corner strip, and I have a black Luminex block on it, which is emitting light, right? So you can actually use these blocks to kind of get creative and make your own light fixtures. And I have also done that in the build. But yeah, this is a great little hack to get some light in your base without basically junking it up with maybe something that you don't like visually, like Simply Lights. Some of my favorite frame blocks are the ones that you see in front of you. So this is kind of a slope slab, right? So it's a little bit smaller. So you can see how we have a more low profile block ramp there. There's your slab combined with this, makes that. You have your regular slope, which is a very common one. This is like one of the first ones here that they ever came out with. And you can kind of build something like this, where it's a thinner line, or you can build something that's, a little bit thicker like that. But definitely you can kind of make diagonal lines, which is not typically, a Minecraft thing. Here's an interesting block here. This is a frame divided panel, and I've used these for like railings in some cases. So I have one block type on the bottom and then a little bit of glass up here. So this is kind of what this looks like. You can do a ton of cool things with frame blocks. And again, if you're detail oriented and you like to kind of make things look not like Minecraft, these are going to be a must have. Now, this would be a terrible guide if I did not include building gadgets. So earlier we talked about, building a big hole underneath your base to, be able to stretch your legs a little bit. One of the ways that you can also accomplish this is the destruction gadget. It is a very powerful tool. You do need power to operate it, and it basically will void everything in the area that you select. So if you pull up your menu here, you're going to have to bind that in settings. You can kind of make whatever size that you have up to 16 radius. But this is a really, really, really easy way to kind of accomplish the same thing. Or if you discovered that, the hole that you built wasn't big enough, you can also go through the walls and you can just, expand in any direction. Didn't really use this too much, but it is a very powerful, very good tool. The cut paste gadget here will basically just literally cut something out of the world and you'll be able to move it to somewhere else. I didn't use that too much. I used it actually to move that pirate ship from one side of my base to the other. I think it was maybe in one of the screenshots before, it was in an entirely different place. So I used the cut paste gadget to just move an already built structure. But the copy paste gadget is definitely going to be your best friend, especially if you're making intricate builds and trying to make sure that your rooms are the same from floor to floor. So this is actually the second place that I moved into once I moved out of my starter home on this server. I built it with just kind of pretty common materials. This is deep slate, polished diorite, very easy to come by, right? Didn't want anything super fancy, pretty simple style here. But I took this from the overworld and just dropped it into the mining dimension. And this is a very powerful tool. You'll see exactly where I use this over and over again in the actual build. But this is a great way to just go ahead and copy an area of your base and replicate it. So you can see how easy adding floors is with this tool. And what I would do is I would do it as detailed as you want. Make a room and finalize it to where you're mostly happy with it. And then just go ahead and keep copying, pasting that same design. A really great thing about this tool is that you can put it through a wireless access point. So a building gadget, copy paste gadget, whatever you want. And it will actually be able to utilize the items inside your applied energistics 2 network to build whatever you want. So as long as you have it, doesn't have to be in your inventory, it could be in your system, this will copy and paste for you. This is also very customizable. So again, I'm pulling up the menu here and I'm doing the settings, and I'm going to take that same build and I'm going to go up and then I'm going to build another floor. And that is literally exactly how easy that this is. Again, just bear in mind, doesn't do well with some of these framed blocks. It will not fill in the textured block that you have put inside of it. But again, you can see how I just saved myself literally a lot of time. So the building gadget is definitely another must have, right? You can build floors just like this. You can open the settings menu. You can build vertical walls. You can change the size of these walls. You can drop them down just like this. And it's a really, really easy way to put some stuff up pretty quickly. This is an example of, you can make a staircase here. So here we go. We got a staircase. Great. I didn't really make that very well. Build to me is one of my favorite functions, right? So you can, if I can take off here, my engine, right? So you can find a spot, and then if you want to build a roof, you can just kind of go do. It's also good for, just doing this, right? I can stand in this corner and I can cover all of this in just like that. And then I can do my, my stick here, and easy peasy. Once again, this is not a tutorial, so I'm not going to be showing you every single function of these blocks, but just know that there's a lot of versatility within this. You can anchor stuff, you can do all sorts of stuff, ray trace, place on top. Yeah, there's quite a bit going on with these building gadgets. So I don't have a tutorial out on it, so find somebody that does and build away. The last gadget we're going to discuss is the exchanging gadget, and this is definitely one of my favorites. Basically, if you don't have the materials required to build your base, but you really want to move in somewhere and you know what it's supposed to look like eventually, maybe, just build it out of some sort of common material, and then you can just swap it later on, right? So we have this whole floor here, it's diorite, and all of a sudden, bam, now it's concrete, right? And I can go ahead and change, let's say if I want to make everything wood. We can do horizontal 16 and wood, 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 wood. Easy, right? You could see how quickly that you could just put stuff together like this. And if you don't like something and you thought that maybe you built it wrong, don't worry. The exchanging gadget just might save your life. One of the great things about the exchanging gadget and all these gadgets for that matter is that you can use them from a very far distance away. So I kind of have this canvas here, and you can just kind of pretend that this is maybe your base, right? It's obviously a big, ugly block, but you can go ahead and just grab whatever you want, and you can just paint on the block type that you want, right? And you can literally just build a little house. Do, 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 do. There we go. And if you don't like a block that you used, you can go ahead and change it. But I basically just stood here, and this is my palette. You can just shift right click on the item that you want. Again, as long as it's in your AE2 system, it will pull that item automatically out. And you can kind of build from a distance and texture things from a distance while being able to see kind of how it looks in the grand scheme of things, which is another option or a really cool way to utilize these tools. Now, admittedly, this tip is going to be hard advice to follow, but it's worth doing if you think about doing it, right? So if you're a mod pack, if you're not playing ATM 10, this video kind of applies to a lot of different mod packs. If you're playing a mod pack that's got a quest book like this, I would definitely suggest you browse through. Like, there's obviously a lot of intimidating things in here. You might not know what any of it means, but go ahead and look for the multi-block requirements, right? So here's the Hephaestus Forge. This is a 7x7 forge, and just take a look at the space requirements that you might be up against. Again, maybe not every mod pack has this, but you can definitely do it in ATM 10. You can see this is 7x7 required here. Here's an SPS, I believe 3, 4, 5. This is also 7x7. There are the thermal evaporation towers that are like 18x4 that you're going to need a lot of space for. This is a little deceiving, but it's probably wise to build a bigger extreme reactor than just a 5x5. And also, and this is kind of where I made this mistake, and I didn't realize actually the sheer size of some of these end game multi blocks, right? This is absolutely gigantic. So if you can do this and you have a quest log in your mod pack, if you're not doing ATM 10 again, go through here and just kind of look at what some of the requirements are going to be, and kind of keep that in mind as you're building your base, because you are going to end up needing room for this kind of stuff. And if you want to put it inside or indoors, then you're going to have to think even further. If you just want to slap this stuff all over the outside of your base, then have at it. You don't need to use this tip at all. And my last little tip is that, again, if you're playing ATM 10, there's actually a building tips tab up here in the quest log, right? And you can kind of look at this to get some inspiration, right? So some of this stuff really appeals to me. Like, I love this, right? I actually love, there's one of a SPS like this. This is like exactly the building type that I love. Like, this is great. I love this. But you can definitely look through here for some inspiration, even color palettes, right? To kind of see maybe what you want to do in your mod pack. So there's a lot of different, sources of inspiration here. You can always Google image, stuff like that, to kind of figure out maybe what other people have done, what looks nice. But this actually is a great little addition, especially with these images to this pack, to, again, just kind of give you a little bit of inspiration. Man, I almost forgot to mention elevator blocks. These are probably literally the best way to get from floor to floor. You can use like an Ender IO staff travel and stuff like that to zoom around to places. But these are like one of the easiest ways that you can travel. And one of the things that you're going to find, I think, in most mod packs these days, is that there is no maximum distance between elevator blocks that you can travel. I'm sure there is somewhere, but like, we're using ATM 10, right? So in this instance, I have an elevator block here, and it literally goes to bedrock, right? And you can use this to kind of create, different portals to different rooms. I'm using portals really loosely here. This is obviously an elevator block, but you can see how this can be a really powerful tool as a way to move around your base, which is something that I did solve and we're about to see. All right, so I'm going to try to wrap this up as soon as possible. Here we are at the Star Forge. This is actually a little neat thing that I did. Macaw's paths and pavings. I put it like over another block. It's kind of a lot going on here, but whatever. Great use of Simply Lights here on top of framed fences with the texture that I like. Let's do a little bit of a flyby here. We're going to look at some of the carpenter blocks that I've used here. Again, you can do some really, really, really cool looking stuff here. It's not super hard. Just have to kind of practice with these. I've had a lot of it, admittedly. This is, we're just adding a little bit of texture on the outside. Even my little circle here has all framed blocks to kind of not make it look blocky, like, Minecraft does look. Everything on the outside here is all aesthetic, but you can see the color palette in action. I actually neglected to put the roof color in there. Um, Again, more frame blocks with glass, and here's kind of a peek inside of my little workshop or control center, or captain's area there. But yeah, this is kind of the outside. Again, carpenter blocks. These are framed floorboards, and you can see how thin these are. But this actually, it lets me add a little bit of color on top of this while not being too, abrasive to look at and blocky. So yeah, carpenter blocks very heavily used here. These little strips are very, very, very powerful and make your base look very good by adding some accent color. Very small amounts of it, just a little bit makes it look nicey nice. Some campfires underneath there to make that look good. But yeah, this is the Star Forge. And there's some examples of the slanted blocks that I used here. Again, just it gives it a little texture, makes it look nice, makes it stand out. At least I think so anyways. So this isn't going to be a full tour, right? We don't have time to go over everything in this episode, but this is kind of my control station here. I have a furnace that I can just kind of cook up anything that I need. I have my dimensional chest, which is, absorbing all of my essences from my resource farm. I have my IO port, so I can, format all my drives. I actually did not use any storage drawers in this build, and it was a little bit more difficult, probably. But I was able to upgrade some of this stuff. Anyways, I can't get sidetracked. But anyways, this is kind of my workshop here. Everything is accessible. Got an armory cabinet to store all my NBT armor. Again, more use of carpenter blocks here. It just adds, it just makes it look so nice. It just adds a little bit more to the build. And then here, I kind of was going with a sort of, I don't know, like desert. I don't know. It just kind of was a cool design that I could use for the base. Up here, I basically have everything else. I have my storage stuff, so I can see how much of everything that I have going on here. More, access to my AE2 network and all of the things that I need: salvaging, smithing, anvil, enchanter, enchantment mover. That's for Quarry Plus. My surface, my experience holder, almost 1,700 levels of experience, and all this other stuff. Library of Alexandria must have. But yeah, this basically helps you to operate very efficiently by having everything you need at your fingertips. So here in the floor, you kind of see that there's two different colors here. These are elevator blocks. We just talked about these. The black one leads somewhere, the orange one leads somewhere else. So the orange one will actually go floor by floor. Hey, those are uneven. I need to fix that. But anyways, you can see very clearly where I've used the copy paste gadget, right? So I made basically a very or somewhat intricate design here that was friendly to use with the copy and paste gadget. And essentially, I only built this once, right? I built it exactly the way I wanted to. I didn't build the outside rooms, but I built this whole shell. And you can see that I have many, many floors of all this, right? It's different on all these floors. I also needed a way to get back to the top very quickly without having to press space 100 times. So in each one of my floors, there are Ars Nouveau portals in these little kind of whatever this is, raised areas, and I just have to walk straight over it, and I come right back up to the top. You might find that getting around quickly and efficiently is actually a huge time saver. And speaking of time savers, that is where the second elevator block has come into play. Now, this one actually leads to like a level like 6 down, but this is actually where I built the portal room, right? Here's my little Thunderbird kind of dude down here. Thought it looked cool. But yeah, so level 9 actually. So this is pretty deep down. But I basically used the same thing. I used mirror weave blocks. Yep, there they are from Ars Nouveau. And I have a spot that I can get to every single one of the levels in my base very quickly. So what I would end up doing is I would just go, okay, I'm doing what I need to do here. I back up, I go down, and then I find where I need to go. Oh, bees autocraft. Let's go right through here. And bam, we're at auto crafting bees, and I'm doing whatever there. And then again, to get back very quickly here. Movement is key, getting around easy is key, and I can't highly recommend something like this enough. And it looks freaking awesome. Also, I've made portals to the Bumble Zone, Mining Dim, Deep Dark, Other, and Nether. Everything I need is right in this room. I don't even have to use waste stones at all. So there's definitely a lot, that I could show you guys. But to me, the details really matter. Framed blocks used very heavily here, literally everywhere. Tiny little panels to cover up something like this, just to kind of give it a real buttoned up look. You can see my use of Simply lights all over the place. These are like sort of a custom light fixture where I have framed walls with Simply lights, little button lights on the tops and bottoms. Again, these are little signs with screens from RF tools to, determine where I need to go. Since everything is so symmetrical and looks the same, I did need a way to figure out, which way to turn when I went through to some of these places. But yeah, carpenter blocks, definitely a game changer. Can make your base look pretty legit. Yeah. So the last thing I want to go over is I just want to show you how I put into practice the advice that I just gave you, right? So this is a room with power. Yeah, I'm feeding all these reactors automatically with all sorts of stuff. So inside of the room, this is what it looks like. Kind of a hot mess over there, actually, because these are creative items that I slapped in after the fact. But this is kind of a very buttoned up room. I got my nitro reactors here. There's some thermo generators there, soul lava underneath. Everything is hidden behind there, and the room looks really nice. But back here, it's kind of a hot mess, right? And it just gives me the freedom to run wires and cables absolutely everywhere and have the inside of my base where I'm spending the most time look really, really good, right? So up here, this is just behind the scenes for some of these blocks. This is, a little room back here. But again, this is actually, this is actually how the room looks. There's like nothing here. And I'll explain what's going on in all these rooms in these subsequent episodes. But yeah, now let's just go ahead and look down here. Got to put on my night vision. But this is essentially what the base looks like from the outside. And you can see how well this works, right? So when I want to drop this Klebano thing inside of a room, I just want, there's only one block accessible inside of the room, which is all I need, but I don't have to clear out all this space, right? It's saving me a lot of time and a little bits and pieces throughout the build by not having to just break out my pickaxe and clear more space. So yeah, this is the outside, and you can really see how this gives me a ton of freedom while also looking great. Here's actually 3 levels that are not used at all. This is the bottom level, and it looks like trash, right? But this is not something that you see, right? This just gives you freedom to build. You can see my space between levels. Let's see if we can see some machines. There's a screen controller in there that's controlling all my screens. Here's an example of just me making, again, something look good from that side of the wall by putting a bunch of black luminax between pipes that I couldn't hide. Actually, you might be able to hide these now in this pack. I think it's like a mechanism block maybe that will cover those up. But yeah, look, it just gives you, it makes this a lot easier. And you might call this like the lazy way out, like just building a giant hole and then, just dropping a bunch of stuff into it. I disagree. I think, everything that matters looks really good. And then everything that doesn't matter, you just basically don't see. All right. So that's all I got for you guys in this episode. I hope you learned something. I hope I gave you, some sort of tip or trick to maybe help your building life a little bit easier. If you're bad at building, the whole method is a really great way of making something that looks good because you essentially don't need to texture anything on the outside of your builds. So it's probably the best single tip I could give you here. I've obviously spent a lot of time, putting a lot of work into the outside of this, but literally none of it's functional. It's just because, I wanted something that looked cool on the outside. So yeah, hopefully you guys learned something. In the next episodes, we're going to be going through the forge kind of level by level, and I'm going to try to continue to bombard you with little tips on, what you should expect in this pack and what were some of the things that I found that were helpful, not helpful, and just kind of, roll through the forge from top to bottom, all the way to the bottom where we have full stars on automation. See you in the next episode.